experimenting with AI, surprisingly good at grouping commits, classy and intelligent. AI integration, it helps summarizing issues, change logs, draft release notes.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Echoes of Innovation. Today I am sitting down with Daniel Viedma, who I've known for quite a while and have had the good fortune of calling him a very good friend of mine. Daniel comes with a very strong engineering background, leading several engineering teams in the agency space, and he's worked very closely with several leading brands across the globe, helping them untangle complex infrastructure, automate their delivery pipelines, and basically make DevOps work really, really well for them. Daniel's one of those engineers who's gone from deep technical work to leading high-velocity teams that have to ship for multiple clients across multiple different tech stacks and deadlines. And he's also built some really strong opinions along the way. But hey, Daniel, before I give away your story, why don't you introduce yourself a bit? Tell us what you're up to right now and what your current focus looks like, and we'll dive in from there.
Sure, yeah. Well, Daniel here. Been working in technology for the past 20 years, roughly. First as a individual contributor, and then at some point along the way I started leading teams and meeting some great folks along the way, launching some amazing projects for some of the top companies here in the country. And I guess at some point in one of the projects, our company's interface and our relationship began, and that's what brought us here. So yeah, thanks for the invite.
Absolutely. Let's start with the easy question, right? What's the biggest, let's say, hair on fire project you remember? The one incident that forced you to change how your team builds infrastructure? The one that made you go, all right, we can't keep doing it this way. We got to change.
We had, I've gone through a few of those instances because it's many years of experience across many different clients. So unfortunately, you do run into issues. One that I particularly remember that it's been kind of burned in my brain. We had this big launch for one of our biggest clients back a few years ago, working for an agency in New York City. We had our staging environment looking good. We're getting ready to launch. We got the green light, pulled the trigger, and essentially the site starting throwing 500 errors. So spent a few hours debugging under a lot of pressure in both internal and external. It turns out that there was a patch applied manually to the staging environment that didn't make it to the production environment, and that basically took us hours to address and to get back to. That was one of the pivotal moments where we said, okay, if environments are not 100% reproducible, then you don't really know what's running. So right. We gotta change that, and I feel like that was one of the big moments for us. Was okay, from now on we gotta treat infrastructure just as we treat any other code. Everything needs to be codified. We need to be able to code review it. We need to be able to deploy. It needs to be reproducible. Yeah. The outcome was positive, but at the moment it hurt.
Absolutely. It's always those, middle of the night pager duty, ops genie notifications and those moments that really force that kind of evolution. I get that. As far as IaC is concerned, like I mentioned, it's table stakes now in 2025, but the gap between, let's say, having a working template and then trusting that template in production is still pretty massive. How do you talk to me a little bit about how you think about bridging that gap? What's the mindset or the pattern that gets you from, hey, we have IaC, but now we also need to get it to, we actually trust this infra to deploy itself?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, anybody can just grab a Terraform template and then just run it and sort of hope that it will work. But it does take a bit of a shift in the culture of the department to really start trusting the process and really get everybody involved. I think it starts also with having the teams and the devs be willing to be multidisciplinary and multi-skilled and understand not just their front-end code or their back-end code, but also how infrastructure works.
Right.
This code, this infra code, it needs to be treated with the same love and care as you will treat your app code. It needs to be code version. It needs to be reviewed. It needs to be plugged into your CI/CD pipelines. And once engineers know that they can rely on IaC to be safe, then they start contributing back instead of working around it. And that's when IaC stops being templates and becomes more your platform.
That's true. That's really interesting because I think a lot of the teams, and I'm sure you share the same opinion. Like in the startup land, a lot of the teams often confuse, template libraries with, hey, we have an IaC strategy now. Like, yes, you can have CloudFormation files sitting in a repo for years, but you can still have dripped all over prod. So at what point do you feel that, let's say, especially startups that are in the early stages, or they've gotten to a point where they're starting to find product market fit and they need to tighten up infrastructure, and push a lot more attention in this particular regard. When do you feel like they should make IaC non-optional within teams? Is there a moment that should really push that particular decision, or at what point do you feel like this is exactly where IaC should now start becoming non-optional?
Okay, so yeah, great question. I would say for brands or startups or products, a moment could be once you start really having to scale and things need to be in elastic containers and you need to put things in containers. All of that stuff needs to be codified so it can be automated and just someone just sort of like deploying more infra as they go manually. For agencies, the nature of the agency is that you naturally work with lots of different clients and different projects, right. And there's a lot of repetition, right? A lot of the infrastructure are the same. You have your storage, you have your computing, you have your backups. So doing that over and over for every different client, it's just not efficient. And also you have to take into consideration that for a given project or a given client, there's usually multiple environments, right? You have your dev environment, your staging, your production. So doing that manually over and over, it's just not only efficient, but also very much error prone. So one of the agencies that I spent the longest back in New York, there were huge gains in the department and at the company level once we started using Infra as code.
Understood. And then lastly, when it comes to IaC, there's also the big question, which is ROI, right? Selling that to management when you're making that investment. So and that conversation is pretty underrated because one, you're looking at most of the time IaC's value is often realized after the audit when they see the compliance report, when they see the compliance reports, when they see the issues coming up. So for someone who's trying to get, let's say, leadership support and trying to sell this internally within their teams, how do you suggest they go about justifying the upfront cost? How did you go about framing it in business terms, like let's say risk, speed, or efficiency?
I think one of the keys here is if you start talking to leadership about Terraform templates or CloudFormation templates, you're probably not going to be very successful. You have to talk to leadership in leadership terms and in terms of business value. So you talk about faster delivery or lower risk or repeatable launches.
Right.
So when you explain that a standardized IaC setup in the company will pay for itself after the first production incident avoided, I think that's when people start to get the idea.
And lastly, when it comes to, let's say, tools, if you were to pick between CloudFormation, Terraform, let's say if you were to pick up the real trade-offs here, which one would you pick for agency work or platform work and why?
Multi-agency work, I would say the default, for me, short answer will be Terraform, just because it's cloud agnostic. Their ecosystem is massive, it's modular. However, if depending on the application, if you are on a very specific sort of strict AWS setup, maybe there's some compliance requirements around it. Maybe you are working for some sort of a health application or government application that requires you to be on AWS, then by all means, CloudFormation also works.
Now, in terms of environment consistency, right? One of the hardest problems. What patterns do you rely on, just to ensure that there's parity between dev, QA, and prod? Are you doing stack templates, seeded data, smoke tests? How do you manage that?
I would say most important one, having a single source of truth. So all of the environments derive from one single stack, one single template, and then there are environment variables for each different environment, basically, that can override specific values. So that's number one. You mentioned like seed data, that also comes in handy. Like if you have like you need to like be testing like data, it's helpful to have a baseline. Maybe you can just sanitize production data across all the different lower environments too, so testing becomes more effective. We typically also like smoke test the environment after deploying it. Just make sure that all the things that are supposed to be up and running are up and running.
I mean, it's as they say, right? Like consistency is the best thing that keeps you from losing sleep in development. So definitely.
Absolutely.
And it's actually a great segue to our next segment, because what happens right after IaC is, let's say where all the magic starts. You're looking at automating QA, giving developers instant feedback and shipping faster. Let's talk about that. So preview environments are kind of the dream, right? Every PR gets its own sandbox. PMs can test features instantly, fewer surprises in staging, but they also cause sprawl nightmares. So in your case, what triggered you to adopt preview environments? Was it an SLA thing, developer pain, quality issue? What made you choose that decision?
I would say the two main factors were one, QA. Before we had this amazing preview links and PRs, oftentimes QA will have to wait until changes get merged and deployed to whatever upper environment. So by the time an issue is found, you have to reopen code that you perhaps touched days ago. You have to create a new PR. So being able to do it on the context of that PR where the code is still being reviewed, it's pretty much amazing from a QA perspective. And then from a dev experience too, how much better is to be able to code review changes while you also test those same changes, right? It's just like night and day. So the quality and honestly the amount of time that it takes you to review code, it's a huge improvement. So those two things, it's just basically a must. Like you can't have a project these days without having pull request reviews. It's just like it's not an option.
Right. And in terms of, let's say, a tech stack, the tools and the infra, like what stack did you use for those PR-based environments? Or let's just say, if you had to pick 3 must-have components to deliver previews fast, like what would you opt for?
So one could be tight integration with your CI/CD pipeline, right? You want your preview link to be created once the PR is open and automatically destroyed once the PR is merged. That's one. Number two, I would say it needs to be fast, right? Like you can be waiting like hours for this preview link to show up, and then the ability to configure per project. What exactly are you previewing? I found that in a lot of cases, you might want to preview your front end branch, what's behind in terms of like backend and infra. It can be consistent for all the preview environments. For example, you get to pick, okay, we're going to be using for our preview environment, we're going to be using our dep environment. For very complex projects, you might choose to bootstrap a full cloud environment for that specific PR, but I have rarely seen this. I think it's like overkill in most cases.
Right. And of course, like the big fear with previews is also sprawl, right? Like it's very easy to go from everyone gets a sandbox to why is our cloud bill 3 times higher? How do you suggest companies like avoid that explosion? Any rules of thumb or for TTL policies, auto scaling?
Yeah, I mean, you can set up, there's like a few things that you can do. You can set branch, maybe not every single branch gets a preview link. Maybe only PRs against certain branches get a preview link. You mentioned TTL policies. Sometimes a PR, it shouldn't happen, but sometimes a PR can just like linger on and on and on. So if there's no conversation happening, there's no comments, there's like no one's looking at that, like maybe that preview link, after a while can just be brought down. there are checks and balances that need to happen before that preview link is even generated. Like if there's like linting errors or like anything that is like not looking good, why even go ahead and spend money creating that preview link? So that's another one.
Right. And in terms of developer feedback, right? Like how have you seen previews change your developer feedback loop? Like are PRs getting merged faster, fewer regressions? And again, going back to that ROI question, what metrics do you typically track to then show that value there?
I think the developer experience, I mean, overall across the board, really like the dynamic in the project, just the confidence of like merging code, knowing that you already seen those things in action is huge. Like for example, a developer might do the code review, can also do like a sanity check. Okay, yeah, I can see that there's a header here. I'm not gonna go ahead and test it in like 10 different browsers, but I know that at least the browser is there. And then when you move this thing into QA, that person already, there's been like a layer of safety going into it that avoids people just wasting time and churning. I would say the review time I would say can be cut by half just by seeing the changes, especially a lot of like CSS changes. Sometimes you don't care so much about specific CSS class, but whether that's actually working or not. So you just like need that preview link, and that's just gonna help the release cadence. How much like features can you pull on a given release, just because you spend less time code reviewing and QAing essentially features.
Yeah, that's true. Love that. And that actually sets us up for the final piece, right? Like once you've got your previews and IaC working, the real unlock comes from how you release. Let's dive into that. So manual releases, we know they just don't scale anymore, especially in the agency setups that we've seen where you're shipping campaigns or features very quickly, very fast. Walk me through your release automation philosophy. Like when you look at manual release processes, where do they usually break first?
Where do they usually break first? It's a good question. I mean, there is just so much work that goes into a release, so many steps, right? Like you have to merge your code to whatever upper branch that often spans across different repos, right? You have your backend repo, your frontend repo, so on and so forth. So that needs to be done multiple times. Then you have to create your tags, right? You have to create your key tags. You have to create your release notes. You have to make sure that all the tickets in Jira or whatever you're using are like correctly tagged. So all of those things, the more you can automate them, the better chance you're gonna have a clean release without having to like roll back, without missing features on a given release note. So anything that you can do about it is gonna eventually, play in your favor. It's gonna give you dividends in the long run.
Exactly. And like you said, I think manual releases typically break at the human step, right? Like the moment somebody has to tag all the Jira tickets or remember all the three CLI commands that need to be put out. In terms of the overall pipeline stack, like how do you structure GitHub actions for build, test, release? Are you using reusable workflows there, composite actions, or orchestration layers?
We typically at least have like 3 different steps. One is build, so build the app and run the test. We have a deploy, so it happens automatically after the merge, and then the tag and promote the release, which basically keeps our pipelines dry and maintainable, especially across multiple client repos.
Right. And just going back to your point about the Jira tickets, right? Like it's one of the hardest part is connecting Jira tickets to actual commits and releases, that traceability piece. How are you ensuring that Jira issues map cleanly to code changes? What sort of branch naming conventions, commit hooks, release notes, automation do you typically favor? Yeah.
So you have 2 options. One, either you have a very diligent team that tags every Jira ticket with the right.
That's the dream, no?
That's the dream.
Yeah.
It works, but again, it takes a very diligent team. You have to do it, as you go. If you wait at the end of the sprint to do it in block, you're gonna miss stuff. You can also implement automation. So if your team works in Jira and all of your branches have the same nomenclature, like for example, you are like referencing specific Jira IDs in your branches. Once you merge all of those changes to an upper branch, you get a collection of all the branches that go up, which essentially are features, which essentially are Jira tickets. So you can create an automation to extract all of the tickets that will go into that release.
Right. And then in terms of ensuring like there's optimal visibility across engineering and the product management function, oftentimes it's always advised that let's have dashboards or signals that we can always expose to PMs and stakeholders so they can see release progress without interrupting engineers. What have you seen work best in your experience, and how do you ensure that you keep PMs away from requesting last-minute changes that typically blow release windows?
No last minute changes when you are in code freeze. Like, it has to be like signed and authorized by the highest level of authorization in the company. But no, jokes aside, things that work well for us, release notes, burn down charts, all of those things. Also, it helps if they're like plugged into sort of like piped into Slack or something like that, because not all the folks are going to be, looking, at GitHub or looking at Jira. So having things pipe into Slack, it does help.
Right. And again, in terms of, let's say, tracking reductions in release cycle length or errors after automating, like how have you gone about tracking it? What numbers have you seen typically move?
Releases from like going, having to release manually, a new version of the site or the app. I've seen those things depending on the complexity of the stack, like take almost a day, just like a full day that you spend between checking all the steps, like running all the testing and everything. That can be cut easily to like hours if you automate it. Like especially like the deploy, specifically the deploy part. The testing, you're always going to have to test it, but specifically the deploy part. In my experience, you can go from 1 day to like an hour. Literally, it's just like an automation, right? That's the whole point. I've also been a reduction in the amount of like rollbacks, just because it's once it's automated, it's much more fail-proof. There's less chance of like someone missing a step, therefore less errors, less need for an eventual rollback, which is something that no one wants to do.
Right. Well, that's huge. And I think like the best signal for release maturity is just how boring your releases become, right? When nobody throws up red flags, when nobody's talking about them, it's working. Yeah. So with everybody, leveraging AI, along with their development cycles. So are you already using AI to help generate change logs or triage CI failures or release notes? How are you navigating that right now?
Yeah, we've been experimenting with AI summaries for change logs for releases. It's surprisingly good at grouping commits per release. There's also, if you're on Jira, there's Atlassian Intelligence, which there's also like there's some improvements there in terms of like AI integration. Which helps summarizing issue stories, change logs, draft release notes based on completed tickets. So yeah, we're making strides there, of course.
Right. And again, just going back to what we were discussing previously about releases, is like the best signal for release maturity is, just how boring your releases become, right? When nobody talks about them, when there's no red flags, there's no errors being thrown up, it's working. So if you had to give, let's say, one rule for reliable pipelines in agency land, right, which is fast delivery, low risk, what would that rule be? What's that rule?
I would say get everybody involved, because it's a cultural change, right? Everybody needs to put their DevOps hat, and then treat the infra code just as you will treat any other app code. Make sure that it's reviewed, make sure that it's maintained, code version control, and pay a little bit of price at the beginning, and then just enjoy the benefits forever.
I love that. All right, so let's end on a fun note. We typically do like a quick rapid fire kind of a round, when we get to the end of the pod. So 3 quick ones, right? Favorite tool that you think that punches way above its weight?
I would say Act for running GitHub Actions locally. Pretty useful.
Okay. what's the worst DevOps myth you wish would die?
That investing in automation is not worth it or not worth it financially.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. And if you could change one thing about how organizations adopt IaC overnight, what would that be?
I would make infra code reviews just as normal and natural as we do other code reviews. Get everybody involved and basically, absorb it as part of the workflow of the department.
Awesome. I love it, Daniel. I think this is pretty awesome. Tons of gold here on IaC, preview automation, and release maturity. I think a lot of folks listening are going to walk away with some serious notes. I really appreciate you coming on, man.
Thank you.
Again, where can people find you? What's the best resource?
I have Instagram, but it's personal. I have a LinkedIn, but I tend to not pay too much attention to it. My email, it's always open, dviedma@gmail.com. Feel free to shoot me a note.
Definitely. We'll link that in the show notes. Perfect. Thank you for joining on, Daniel.
Thank you, Dhanraj.
Right.